Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Spider-Man Far From Home. This Spider-Man movie kind of has a lot to live up to, and not just because there's other Spider-Man movies and Spider-Man Homecoming, which this is the sequel to, but everything that's happened with the Spider-Man character in movies since, the last one came out. We had Avengers Infinity War, which obviously had a big Spider-Man scene. We had Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is probably the best Spider-Man movie ever made, as well as pushing Spider-Man into both dimensions in terms of the multiverse or the Spider-Verse, but also culturally pushing it forward and introducing Miles Morales. And then you had Endgame, which he didn't have as much to do. I know he cried, but that was, that's still a big deal. And then Far From Home comes out. It's sort of really not fair for this movie. We've been inundated with all this stuff and it's been amazing, but I sort of wish they'd waited a little longer for this, because under the context of everything we've seen, this maybe isn't as mind-blowing, and it's more of kind of a classical kind of Spider-Man story, but it's not going to change the world or introducing anything too new, which it isn't trying to do by design, but it is really interesting to go from all these kind of mind-blowing superhero things and Spider-Man things to this. The disappointment I've read from people, I sort of get it, because to go from all those things to this is maybe a bit of a decline. I do like that Far From Home really tries to make a different kind of Spider-Man movie. This is the live-action Spider-Man movie that has the least amount of it shot in New York, although that might not even be true, because I think they shot a lot of Homecoming in Georgia, but by design, not a lot of it shot in New York. And it's, Spider-Man not in New York, and it doesn't feel as small as normal, and it feels even bigger. I can play that off in here, and I think it's by people who are more accustomed to the Sam Raimi movies and less accustomed to the MCU Spider-Man, is all of the complications of the MCU that come into these Spider-Man movies. I get what they're saying about that, because I like how in Sam Raimi's, I don't like Andrew Garfield, so whatever, but in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, as big and as massive and as big of the explosions were, it all took place within New York City, so as big as it also felt very small. I think Homecoming kept that vibe incredibly well, but I don't think Far From Home does that, but I don't think Far From Home is trying to do that at all. It's basically let's change that, let's do something different with this character. This is more of a classical story in a lot of ways. It's like Ditko, it's like Ramita, with the Stan Lee era. The classic Spider-Man tales that Ditko and Lee and all them would do, which are more about morality and what Mysterio has to do with that, what his friends have to do with that, what's going on and not wanting to be the next Iron Man while also sort of being the big superhero right now, and everyone being sort of freaked out, and he doesn't sure what to do because he is still a kid and not sure how he feels about the snap, or as they call it in this, the blip, which is sort of interesting that I guess do they know he snapped, but then they know Tony Stark died, so I think this is a good Spider-Man movie, and I applaud them for actually trying something different with this. Part of me is I don't know, I just want Spider-Man to be in New York, that's kind of the Spider-Man I like, but I still really like this story, and sure, it isn't as kind of honed down and high school as Homecoming was, which is something I really liked about it. In the end of this, I loved all the complications with it. I loved all the MCU stuff. I don't know if I really loved it as much as a really good Spider-Man movie, but I still really liked it because I like Peter's internal conflict, whether he should be a normal person or not, and what he should do with that, and how he wants this strive for normalcy he can't afford to have because he's Spider-Man, because he is, the heir apparent to Tony Stark, because he's an Avenger now, but he still wants to go on his high school trip and he's not sure what to do. But at the same time, everything with Mysterio, which by the way, that's probably some of the best stuff that I've seen live action wise in terms of surrealism and special effects, maybe even better than what we saw in Doctor Strange. I really love those sequences when they really got into them, especially the ones with Spider-Man going into this Mysterio world or whatever. I thought that was just mind-bogglingly good. I was really surprised how weird and strange that could get, and that reminded me of Ditko. I think that's one of the things about this. This is the first live action movie to come out after they're dead, and it kind of very much feels like both of their influences, but everything with Mysterio and that. And I liked what they did with the Mysterio character, because it kind of leads you through not just everything that happened in Infinity War, but also through Into the Spider-Verse, that maybe he's the different Mysterio who can open dimensions. And I think it makes you second guess what it's going to be. I guess that's a spoiler, but not really. And I liked that whole deception and what that's trying to say about Peter and how he can be taken advantage of and how he needs his father figures, but also how this is a very serious real world that he is still not entirely sure how to navigate and is still naive to it, despite the fact that she has been to space. And I thought Jake Gyllenhaal's performance was actually really good. It's a little off, it's a little kind of more theatrical, strange, but Jake Gyllenhaal can navigate that incredibly well. I get that like this relies on the MCU a lot, like almost as much as the last one, but those were kind of always the Spider-Man comics that I grew up on. It's like, oh, he'd swing by, see Reed Richards, or I mean, I guess he's not doing that yet, but he existed within that universe. And this film, very much more so. Last time, a lot of people said it had this kind of meta narrative of, oh, I really want to be in the Avengers kind of thing because Sony owns the Spider-Man rights and so forth. I don't get that in this as much. I actually don't think it's meta narrative. I think it's more of like, this is who this character is. He's been through this big thing. This is how he's perceived. He's come a long way, and all these major things have happened. He has to grapple with the effect of who he is. Maybe there was more of a meta narrative, and maybe that's what they were doing in Homecoming, but I really didn't get that from here, because the whole idea of using Spider-Man in high school is using the idea of being a superhero as maturity, and taking that to such a further extreme, because it's getting really serious. Like, he really fucked up at certain points, but I think he also gets that this has real consequences. He's died, other pretty horrible things have happened, and he's seen it, and he's seen Tony Stark die, and he knows how serious this can really get. And you need to have that reality in this. That reality should be in this. And I think in some ways, because these movies sort of don't talk about Uncle Ben, we assume that happened, right? Did they mention him? Or did they just have Uncle Ben's rice or something? I don't know. They don't go into that, and that's an important character building thing. And in some ways, we haven't had the origin story, but we've had the idea and the morals of the origin story going throughout these things. And I think him wanting a father figure and wanting a Tony Stark back when it's constantly everywhere in his entire life. I like how they did that going from the first film, and how that connects to the MCU, and how that connects to how serious Peter Parker is, because the thing is, Spider-Man is a big deal for the Marvel universe, and he's a big deal as a comic book character, but you kind of have to make him a big deal within the MCU, and I thought they did an amazing job at that. I still love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. He's able to do something that's sort of the whole thesis of this adaptation of Spider-Man, because his Spider-Man is more like what happens in the MCU, where they take these characters and make them more modern, and much like how, Tony Stark's don't show your gang signs and your MySpace photo. In this, it's sort of very much modern, like a modern high school of 2019 or 2017 or whenever these films take, who knows. And it's very much using the modern context of things, but also taking those classic Spider-Man stories and doing Ditko Spider-Man, or referencing, last time it referenced a really good Peter David Spider-Man comic when he couldn't get out of a suburban neighborhood. This just reminded me of a very good Spider-Man story, and what those very good Spider-Man stories are supposed to do, while also staying very modern. He's not interested in directly telling those panels. He's interested in doing what the MCU does so well, which is taking these characters and updating them and making them relevant again. And I think Tom Holland is really good at, he reminds me more of the Ditko kind of Peter Parker, and bringing him to 2019. I really like Zendaya or whatever, as Mary Jane. I think she's really, really great, and you get how it's almost a different character, exactly because of personality. She doesn't even feel kind of the same character you're used to, but I sort of really like that, because it makes it feel more high school and more relatable, because I didn't grow up with people who became supermodels or in Shakespeare plays that were apparently a big deal or something. It kind of makes it sort of more real, and I think Zendaya is very good at that. That's what I really like about these films, is they feel like a modern kid's kind of high school, a modern kid's kind of world, and it stays within that high school story. They kind of get into the 5-year age difference in some ways. They don't get it entirely. I was kind of thinking his girlfriend from the last movie would have aged up, and he wouldn't have, and he'd be we'd see a picture of her or something. I don't know. That was just an idea I had. You get some of it at the beginning, but you don't get too much of it. You don't get him interacting with the cops in the restaurant that's in the trailer, which is sort of interesting. When I think of Far From Home, it's kind of hard to go from this one, because I kind of wish I had more of a break, because there's been so many big superhero movies. With Spider-Verse in December, but then you had Shazam and Captain Marvel, and it just feels like we're sort of inundated, and then you get this, and I think normally I'd be wow, this is a decent Spider-Man film, it's a good Spider-Man film, but it's it doesn't really touch the first two Raimis, or to me Homecoming or Spider-Verse. It's kind of right under them, frankly, I think, in terms of quality, but I think it should get points for trying to accomplish something with a character that normally is just in New York and so forth. forth. Also playing with the idea of, you know, how weak the world is after what happened with Tony Stark, and how weak Spider-Man is, and how he needs to overcome that, and what his place in the larger universe, and what his place is in terms of maturity, which I think is something everyone needs to figure out. And I think it speaks to how universal the Spider-Man character is, because you kind of need to find your own way and find your own place in the world, and the world's kind of demanding him be something that you really shouldn't be listening to what the world demands of you. You really should listen to who you are, or maybe come to terms with either of those things and understand maybe your place in the world is something you should follow. Maybe that is the best path, or maybe it's more responsible to follow that path and not follow the path that would be better for you personally. I think that's one of the things I really liked about this, is because within all Spider-Man, great Spider-Man stories, there's a moral lesson. You know, you have all these greedy adults that are trying to get what they want, get what they deserve, and in a way Peter Parker can definitely understand that he needs to be Spider-Man. But I think this is a conflict that's even in the Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, and continues on in this Spider-Man 2, I guess. I think that's why these films like really get the character, because that is such an important part of growing up, is understanding your place in the world and how you want to take it. And I think Spider-Man maybe is given like one of the greatest opportunities ever and so forth, and also gets to be Spider-Man. It is so well at doing that. And you know, sometimes a trip to Europe for a young person is kind of a mind-blowing kind of experience that kind of formats your brain in certain ways and makes you maybe want to take that on, maybe not want to take that on. And I think Spider-Man had to find the right thing to do, was the selfless thing, and not hang out with MJ and so forth. It's just to be Spider-Man, and that's the best role for him, whether he wants to or not. And I think his self-sacrificing versus a bunch of shitty adults that just want to do something for maybe their own ego or something like that, Peter Parker is sort of beyond that, and that's what makes him such a great protagonist, and what makes him such a great character for kids, and why we continue to live on through him, is because you always understand that he is exactly who he's going to be, and he screws up and he messes up and he gets confused, but he is who he is, and he's a good person. And hey, that's why Tony Stark picked him in the first place. To really get into the morals of a great Spider-Man story is why this film is as good as it is. You know, it's not the best Spider-Man movie, it's not mind-blowing. You might be disappointed because you want something that like was totally unfair to put on this movie, by the way. But you are anyway. But I still think it is a very solid Spider-Man film, and it speaks to someone like John Watts that he can put out a Spider-Man narrative like this shows someone who really cares about a Spider-Man story and understands what makes them work and understands what the morals that they need to tell. And I don't think there's a lot of creators and directors and studios that are thinking about that as much as your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man does. So if you've actually, I want to talk about a thing at the very end. Is definitely spoilers. I know I kind of spoiled some stuff. Well, anyway, this is the spoiler thing. I just cut myself off. Whatever. So these are spoilers for the end credit things. I want to talk about one, which is J. Jonah Jameson having his own InfoWars, which was pretty funny. I like that. I'm not sure if I'd want to see that throughout a whole movie, and just a simple cameo was fine, but I like that they kind of realized you can't really not have anyone else play J. Jonah Jameson. That sort of ruins the context, which changes them, which means you probably could have gotten a different actor to play him, because J.K. Simmons is playing the 60s J. Jonah Jameson, but I still liked it. Also, there's no TVs playing news on Madison Square Garden, but I understand the narrative reason they did that, so you don't need to explain that to me. But just to be clear, people that aren't from New York, that is not something that happens. But him revealing his identity is a huge shift, and I'm curious like what the ramifications of that are. Maybe he has to become Iron Man because of the public figure that he has now become. That's something I thought about. And then the end credit scene with Nick Fury, I kept thinking that they were Skrulls, like for most of the movie, because they're kind of so off from being Nick Fury, and I sort of like that, but I'm curious what Nick Fury is doing with the Skrulls and what he's going to do with the Skrulls. This clearly takes away any sort of invasion-y thing that everyone had kept theorizing. Is definitely like totally out the window now, so they're clearly doing something different. If they're working with S.H.I.E.L.D., I'm curious what that's going to be, because that could be cool. So if you've seen Spider-Man Far From Home and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.